Good morning. While the slides are coming, first let me congratulate the library for the 100 years anniversary. I thank Professor Renaldus Gudauskas for the invitation, and I greet all members of Parliament, ambassadors, and colleagues here present. I was wondering why I have been invited coming here, since I have no contact with libraries except as a reader. And of course, my wife is a librarian, so it's maybe I thought maybe Renaldus made a confusion and he wanted to invite her, or maybe it's because my mother had her 100 years anniversary this year, so it's like your library. Actually, 1990 was a moment of great optimism, and I wanted perhaps to start with that. It's, of course, as we all know, the aftermath of the First World War, and a moment when people thought it would never happen again. And I don't know the specific context of the decisions here in Lithuania, but I know it was also in 1919 that, for example, the International Academic Union was created. And many activities related to knowledge, science, but particularly the humanities became very, very important. People, when they die a lot, like in wars, they remember the meaning of life, not necessarily the Monty Python's meaning of life. And then they forget about it. And so we had, again, the same experience after World War II, when UNESCO was created. And then in 1949, our Council of Philosophy and Human Science has been created. And again, forgotten about. So I'm very happy that Lithuania today still understands what many people in the world forgot about. So I will try to stick, actually I will try, I'm not sure I will be able to do less than 20 minutes, and bringing you a certain number of observations first. Well, first one is, today we talk a lot about the crisis of humanities, not only today, for the last 20, 30 years. And in fact, I see this as a recurrent debate that started in the Renaissance, when the academic world shifted from facing reflections and dilemmas into trying to cope with the need for urgent solutions. This, as we know, led to the impressive development of science in the West, and the development of science, of course, brought tremendous success for all of us. But every so often, we come back to this basic issue. Life is not about solving problems. Problems, by definition, are things that are going to be solved, because the difficulty is to formulate the problem. Now, dilemmas don't have a solution. Dilemmas require an option. And every time, for various reasons, contextual reasons, could be environmental, could be social clashes, could be all sorts of disruptive phenomena. Every time humanity faces this, it faces dilemmas. And we are less prepared to face dilemmas today than we were in the past. And we are less prepared for a number of reasons. I will go back to that. But first, we live in disruptive times. We understand that. And I'm not going to go all through all these topics. What I fear is that we run from one tree to the next tree without ever seeing the forest. Today, the fashion is climate. Now, I also work on paleoclimate, and I understand climate is very, very important. I can reassure you that there is not a single shred of evidence that we are living a major climatic era change. All that we live, all that we experience, falls within the variability of climatic oscillations. Having said this, we can die. Having said this, climatic oscillations can be very severe for humans. But to understand the nature of the difficulties is fundamental to design strategies to face them. It is not by running after the perceived emergency that we will solve any of our, or we will face any of our dilemmas. And probably we could say that after a period of very strong optimism, again after World War II, society started to be confused by the fact that by the mid-late 60s, despite the tremendous improvement in life quality everywhere, people started to come in the streets and rebel against what was happening. I'm in Lithuania, so let me give you one example how we can make confusions about things. What has happened in the late 1960s? If you are a French or a Portuguese, you will think there was a tremendous left-wing movement against capitalism led by the May 68 in Paris and the rebel movements in Italy, in Portugal, and so on. If you are in Poland or in Hungary, you will think it was a major movement of youngsters and workers against communism. If you were in China, you would think it was a major movement of students against the structure of universities and of peasants against urban cities. If you were in the United States, you would think it's a major movement of youngsters looking for a bit of drugs and rock and roll. But if you are an historian in 500 years ahead of us, you will look back and you will see simply humans being a little bit confused about a changing world and without any clue of what can be the future. And so they are coming into the streets, each one of them looking at a tree and none of them seeing the forest. And today we are seeing exactly the same thing. You can look at Hong Kong, you can look at Brazil or Chile, and you may think it's a different process. And of course, for each of these cases, you can find a separate cause, but there's something connecting them. Like you can think that you have climatic refugees, you have war refugees, you have economic migrants, and you have tourists. But in 500 years' time, you will only record that by the dawn of the third millennia, there was a growing trend towards mobility. Why? Because frontiers have to be challenged. Because everything that we know of the world is going to change. We know that, but we don't know how it will be. And this is the despair of our citizens, and it's the despair of the governments as well, because particularly when they are elected, and even if they are not elected, they have to give some hope to people, and they choose the wrong path. They think giving hope is to build short-term answers to false problems. But we have to understand that we have to reintroduce a reasoning on dilemmas and a long-term strategic reasoning. People are not stupid, they can understand that. We are still in a moment of growing oblivion. And we see signs of that. For example, we talk very little about history and more about memory. But memory is a subjective perception, a selection which is based on emotion, not on rational reasoning. No, nothing against memories, but memories are the base foundation of identities. And when you stress identities in moments of required transformation, you go to war. It's that simple. If you stress diversity in moments like this, every time you did that in the past, we were at war. And on the other hand, if you stress the humanity, you don't destroy diversity, but you recall the fact that we are one species. And actually, when people talk, for example, about climate change, and then there is an awareness that we need convergent strategies all across the planet. So if we need those, if we are asking all the peoples in the world to have a convergent strategy, despite their cultural differences, despite their geographic, social, and so on differences, we have to tell them that we are one. And we can only build a common sense of the future if we build a common or a convergent understanding of the past. I would say that amidst all this, the greatest danger is alienation. It's not on economics, it's not on climate. It's on the fact that first people started to focus on problems instead of dilemma, and then they got this huge acceleration in terms of the understanding of phenomena, which digitalization is accelerating even further. And digitalization is compressing the perception of space and time, and thus preventing the understanding of the potential connection between causes and consequences, because they all seem to be simultaneous. This leads people to lose a competence that almost all evolved mammals have, even other species, but all the mammals. Why does it that dogs in the streets of a city like Vilnius will not go across the street anywhere, but dogs in the countryside do? It's because dogs in the city learn cause and consequence, and they can be killed by cars. Why do people require the need to challenge the impossible demands they have sometimes, and then face death? Like, for example, when people today, many people, growing number of people, refuse to take vaccines, for example. And you have the rebirth of diseases in Europe, in the United States, that were considered extinct. So alienation is fundamental. It's the biggest problem we have. Alienated people will be incapable of facing dilemmas. They will be incapable of making rational choices. And they will be anguished, all the time anguished, focusing on immediate targets. I could give you a good example. The SDGs, the Objectives of Sustainable Development. Are they realistic? No. Why? Because they cannot be achieved? Of course they can be achieved. The problem is not that. The problem is that if you make people being focused on an agenda of objectives, they will not move. That's that simple. You have to build as objectives intangible goals, because people are moved by intangible goals. It has always been like that in life, in the past. That's what humans are about. And this is why we need to focus on processes and not on goals. The processes will lead to achieve results in the end. So we have to help contribute, building, imagining futures which are different from the present, which we cannot foresee in detail, but who cares, in which or related to which we focus on the process. In that respect, one very important element is the reorganization of the territories, because we don't know how the future will be in 20 or 30 years' time. But we know that whichever the future will be, it will be based on territories, and in the perceptions people will have on those territories, the landscapes they will build, and the conflicts between those landscapes, between those perceptions. This is where I think organizing clusters of knowledge and identity related to knowledge, not to memory, to knowledge, to the future. This is the key to allow for the required flexibility to redesign the planet, trying to avoid war. This has always been the program after a big war, peace. But then we take it for granted and we forgot about it. So we need to design priorities. I'm getting to the end. There are some fundamental priorities, and I would say comparing realities across the planet in space and through time is very important. And we have some strategic priorities, among which I would stress the need to build a common or a convergent understanding of the past and to encompass geographic and cultural geographic diversity. Libraries, I think, play a key role in that. And I would say it's very interesting that in the era of digitalization, in which people seem to read less, at least they seem to be more focused on sight and much less in other senses like listening to. This has, of course, secondary, very severe consequences, for example, in dialogue. You lose the capacity to build dialogue. But it's interesting that people still look at libraries, not only in Lithuania. We can see it everywhere. I don't know why. I'm not an expert in the field. Probably some of you may have studied this, but it's, I think, a fact. Certainly, libraries build what I think it's fundamental today, which is to reintroduce tangibility, the importance of the objects, while using to the full capacity the resources of the digital technologies. So I think this is a big challenge. We have to use those digital capabilities to bring people back to the experience of the tangible difficulty, challenge, and emotion of going one after the other pages of a book, for example, and comparing books, using your hands, the sound, the touch, and not only the sight, not only the memory in your brain, the full use of the senses. And this is what I think, okay, I like books, I like to read, but sometimes people say, oh, Luis, you see, in the future people can read in tablets. It doesn't matter. I think it does matter. Because reading is not only about the words. It's about the full use of your body. It's a performance. You have to stand up, grab the book, put it back on the shelf, put it one on top of the other. And this is a permanent exercise for your brain. If libraries can play that role, I think they will be very efficient in the future. Thank you very much.